Rich parents laughed at a black CEO's accent until she ended their deal. The glass walls of the conference room reflected the city like a mirror of power and money. Below, cars moved like small toys, quiet and obedient. Inside, the air was cold, sharp, and tense. When the woman at the head of the table spoke, her voice carried a calm strength and an accent that made a few people smile for the wrong reasons. Amara Lewis sat straight, her hands folded neatly on a leather folder. She wore a simple dark suit, nothing flashy, nothing borrowed. Everything about her was earned. She was the CEO of Link Systems, a fast-growing technology company that had changed how logistics firms worked across 3 continents. She was black, she was self-made, and she spoke English with a soft West African accent she had never tried to erase. Across the table sat Richard Hale and his wife Eleanor. Old money, clean smiles. Their son Mark leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching Amara like she was an interesting experiment. So Richard said, tilting his head slightly, "Could you repeat that last part?" Amara met his eyes. "Of course. As I was saying, our platform reduces operating costs by 23% within the first year." She spoke slowly, clearly. Eleanor glanced at Mark, then back at Richard. A small laugh slipped out of her mouth before she could stop it. She covered it with a cough. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, smiling too widely. "It's just your pronunciation. It's charming, very international." Mark chuckled. "Yeah, took me a second to catch that." Amara felt it, the shift, the way the room leaned away from her words and toward her voice. What would you do if success was still not enough for respect? She kept her face calm. Years of boardrooms had taught her how to breathe through moments like this. "If there's any part of the proposal that needs clarification, I'm happy to explain." Richard waved a hand lightly. "No, no. We understand the numbers. We just like things clear. Communication is very important in partnerships like this." "Of course," Amara said. "That's why I'm here." Her assistant Julia sat beside her, jaw tight. She knew that look on Amara's face, the one that meant she was listening more than she was speaking. Eleanor leaned forward. "You know, dear, our partners are very traditional. They expect a certain Polish." Amara nodded once. "Lynx works with partners in 12 countries. We adapt to results." Mark smirked. "Results are great. Image matters too." There it was, not loud, not cruel, just sharp enough to cut. "Have you ever been judged before you even finished speaking?" The rest of the meeting moved forward, but something had already broken. Amara presented charts. She answered questions. She did not stumble once. Still, the smiles never softened. The jokes never fully stopped. When the meeting ended, Richard stood and offered his hand. "We'll be in touch," he said, the words light dismissive. Amara shook his hand firmly. "I look forward to it." As she walked out into the hallway, the door closing softly behind her, she felt the weight settle in her chest. Not anger, not shame, just a quiet, familiar tension. They had laughed, and they had no idea what she was about to decide. The first time someone mocked Amara Lewis's accent, she was 12 years old and standing in front of a classroom in Atlanta, holding a piece of paper with trembling hands. Her family had moved from Ghana less than a year earlier. She had practiced reading the paragraph all night, whispering the words to herself, trying to make her mouth behave like everyone else's. She read the first sentence. 2 boys in the back started laughing. "Say it again," one of them said loud enough for the class to hear. "What did you say? Op per ateng." The teacher told them to stop, but her voice was tired, like she didn't want trouble. Amara stood there, cheeks burning, and finished reading anyway. She did not cry in class. She waited until she got home, went to the small bathroom and cried silently with the sink running so her mother would not hear. That night her mother knocked gently on the door. "Amara," she said, "open." Amara wiped her face and opened the door. Her mother looked at her for a long moment. Then she lifted her chin with 2 fingers. "You speak with the tongue of your home," her mother said softly. Do not let anyone make you feel small for that. But they laugh, Amara whispered. Her mother nodded. People laugh when they don't understand. And some people laugh when they want you to hide. You will not hide. Those words stayed with Amara like a quiet rule. Years later, at 17, she sat in the public library after school, her backpack heavy with borrowed books. Her mother worked long shifts as a nurse's aide. Her father drove a taxi. Money was always tight, but Amara's grades were strong and her hunger for knowledge was stronger. A librarian once asked her, "Why are you always here?" Amara answered simply, "Because I want more." She earned a scholarship to a state university, then another to a graduate program. She studied systems engineering and business, not because it sounded impressive, but because she wanted control. She wanted to build things. She wanted to solve real problems that people paid real money to fix. Even in college, the accent never fully left her. It softened with time, but it remained, and some people noticed. During a group presentation in her sophomore year, one classmate interrupted her mid-sentence. "Can you slow down?" he said, smiling, like it was friendly. "It's hard to understand you sometimes." Amara slowed down. She finished the presentation. She got an A. Later that night, she rewrote the whole project plan by herself and sent it to the professor with clean numbers and a clear strategy. The professor replied with one line, "This is the best work in the class." Amara read the message 3 times. Then she stared at her laptop screen until her eyes felt dry. She did not tell anyone. She simply saved the email and went back to work. After graduation, she entered the corporate world and learned quickly that talent was not always enough. In meetings, people interrupted her more. Some managers repeated her ideas as if they were new. Some clients asked if her supervisor could join the call. Once at a consulting firm, a senior partner walked into a room where Amara was already presenting to a client. He sat down, listened for 2 minutes, then smiled at the client and said, "Let me translate." Amara kept speaking, but her stomach turned. After the meeting, she confronted him in the hallway. "You didn't need to do that," she said, voice controlled. He shrugged. "Relax. It's just easier for them." "For them," Amara repeated. He leaned closer, still smiling. "If you want to climb here, you need to learn how to fit in." Amara stared at him. "No," she said. "I need to learn how to win." A year later, she left that firm. She started Link Systems with 2 engineers she trusted and a small group of early investors who believed in her vision. The company began in a cramped rented office with stained carpet and cheap desks. They worked nights. They slept on couches. They ate microwave noodles. Amara handled sales calls during the day and product strategy at night. In those early months, there was no room for ego, only survival. One night around 2 a.m., her co-founder Dev rubbed his eyes and said, "You should go home. You've been here for 16 hours. Amara didn't look up from her laptop. "If we miss this deadline, we lose the contract," she said. Dev sighed. "You know you don't have to prove anything to anyone." Amara finally looked at him. Her eyes were tired but clear. "I'm not proving," she said. "I'm building." That was the difference. Over the next 5 years, Lynx grew fast. Not through hype, but through results. Their software helped shipping companies stop losing millions due to delays and bad planning. They built a reputation for being reliable and sharp. Investors came, media came, awards came, and still the little comments came too. In a TV interview, a host once smiled and said, "You're so successful. Your story is inspiring, and your accent, it's so unique. Do you ever plan to work on it?" Amara smiled for the camera. "No," she said politely. "I plan to work on my company." Off camera, Julia, who had started as an intern and became her executive assistant, handed her a bottle of water and muttered, "They always find something." Amara nodded. "Let them," she said. That was her public face. Calm, steady, unmoved. But private moments were harder. Sometimes after a long day of meetings, she sat alone in her office when the lights in the building were dim and the city outside looked far away. She replayed words in her mind, not because she believed them, but because she had to manage them. People like Richard and Eleanor Hale were not rare. They were part of a system that measured value in the wrong ways. And still, she had learned something over time. People who mocked her voice usually did it when they thought they were safe, when they believed she needed them more than they needed her. That was why the meeting with the Hales bothered her. Not because they laughed. She had faced laughter before. It bothered her because it revealed something important. They thought they held the power. The Hale family owned Hale & Sons Capital, a private investment firm with deep connections. Their son Mark was building a luxury real estate project that needed a technology partner for logistics and vendor management. Their team had approached Linux, not the other way around. The deal was big, public, and it could open doors to new markets. Julia followed Amara into her office the next morning holding a tablet. They sent an email, she said. Amara took the tablet and read silently. It was polite, short, full of soft control. They wanted another meeting. They wanted revisions. They wanted alignment. Amara set the tablet down slowly. Julia hesitated. "Are we doing it?" she asked. Amara leaned back in her chair, eyes on the ceiling for a moment. "We will meet them again," she said, voice even. Julia studied her. "And if they keep treating you like that," Amara's gaze returned to Julia, steady and calm. "Then they will learn something," she said. She stood up and walked to the window. The city looked the same, busy and bright, but she felt different inside. The next meeting was not just business anymore. It was a test of something deeper. Because the deal with the Hales was approaching fast, and for the first time in a long time, Amara was already thinking about walking away. Richard Hale believed in order, not the kind written in books, but the kind that came from knowing where you belonged in the world. He had been born into money, educated among people who spoke like him, dressed like him, and thought like him. Power to Richard was quiet and inherited. It did not need to prove itself. At the breakfast table in their penthouse, he folded his newspaper and looked at his wife. "She's sharp," he said. "I'll give her that." Eleanor stirred her coffee slowly. "Sharp doesn't always mean suitable." Mark leaned back in his chair, scrolling on his phone. "The product works," he said without looking up. "Our team checked." "That's not the point," Eleanor replied. "Image matters. Investors listen to tone, to presence." Mark smirked. "You mean accent?" Eleanor gave him a warning look, then sighed. "I mean confidence." Richard nodded. "And control." They were not shouting. They were not angry. That was how Prejudice lived in their home. Calm, measured, reasonable on the surface. Later that day in a private meeting room at Hale & Sons Capital, Richard sat with two senior partners. The walls were lined with framed photos of deals signed buildings, opened, hands shaken. "The CEO from Lynx," one partner said. "Lewis. She runs a tight operation." Richard smiled thinly. "Yes, but she's still new and eager." The other partner raised an eyebrow. "You think so?" Richard leaned back. "People like her always are. She needs this deal more than we do." They talk numbers. They talk timelines. They talk leverage. Not once did they consider the possibility that Amara Lewis might have options they couldn't see. At home that evening, Eleanor hosted a small dinner with friends. Crystal glasses, soft music, conversations about travel and schools and how the city was changing. One woman leaned in and whispered, "Isn't your son working with that tech woman?" Eleanor smiled politely. "Yes. Brilliant, really. Very ambitious." The woman nodded. "I saw her interview. Strong message. Hard to place her, though." Eleanor understood. "Yes," she said softly. "Hard to place." Mark overheard and laughed. "She's not subtle, that's for sure," Mark, Eleanor said sharply. What he replied, "I'm just saying, she talks like she's still proving something." That night, Mark sent a message to his father. We should push harder in the next meeting. She won't walk. Richard read it, then typed back. Agreed. Across the city in a quieter building, Amara sat with her leadership team around a long table. No art on the walls, no inherited pride, just screens, notes, and focus. Their legal counsel, Sandra, spoke first. The Hale deal is solid, but the terms they're pushing are aggressive. Dev frowned. They want exclusivity. Too much of it. Julia added. And they keep delaying on commitments while asking for concessions? Amara listened without interrupting. When they finished, she nodded. They believe they have leverage, she said. Sandra looked at her. Do they? Amara met her gaze. Not as much as they think. She stood and walked to the screen, pulling up a map and a set of documents. We've had interest from 2 logistics groups in Europe, she said, and 1 in Southeast Asia. Dev's eyes widened. Serious interest, very, Amara replied. We slowed it down because of this deal. Sandra leaned forward. So why are we still here? Amara paused. Because this is not just about money, she said carefully. It's about how we are treated. Silence followed. Julia broke it. They laughed, she said quietly. Amara nodded once. Yes, Dev exhaled. Then we need to be clear-eyed. They planned the next meeting carefully. Not to impress, not to beg, but to observe. Amara wanted to see how far the Hales would go when they believed they were in control. 2 days later, Richard received confirmation the next negotiation would take place at a private business forum with other investors present, public enough to matter, polished enough to protect reputations. Richard smiled when he read the details. Perfect, he said to Eleanor. She won't risk embarrassment. Eleanor nodded. People like her are careful. They were wrong. As the date approached, both sides prepared, one confident in inherited power, the other grounded in earned strength. The room was set. The stakes were high, and neither side yet understood how much would change when they met again. The ballroom of the private business forum smelled of polished wood and expensive perfume. Tall windows let in soft daylight, and quiet conversations floated through the air like background noise. Men in tailored suits stood in small groups holding glasses of water or coffee, speaking in low, confident tones. Amara walked in with Julia at her side. She wore a navy suit and low heels. Her posture was straight. Her expression was calm. Heads turned, some curious, some assessing. On the stage, a moderator adjusted his microphone. Our next discussion will focus on strategic partnerships in modern infrastructure, he announced. Please welcome our panelists. Richard Hale took his seat with ease, smiling at familiar faces. Eleanor sat in the front row. Mark leaned against a pillar nearby, phone in hand. Amara sat beside Richard, placing her notes neatly on the table. She glanced at him and nodded politely. The discussion began smoothly. Numbers, trends, growth. Amara spoke with clarity, explaining how Lynx had optimized supply chains across regions. The audience listened. Some nodded. Then Richard leaned toward his microphone. Well, he said lightly, I think what Amara is trying to say is that efficiency depends on clear communication between systems. A few people chuckled. Amara turned her head slowly. That is exactly what I said, she replied. Richard smiled. Of course, I just wanted to simplify it. The moderator shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Later during the Q&A, an investor raised a question about risk management. Amara began to answer, laying out the process step by step. Mark laughed softly from the side of the room. Sorry, he said, not sounding sorry at all. I keep getting distracted by the accent. It's different. The room went quiet. All eyes turned to Amara. She felt the moment stretch. The old pressure rose in her chest, familiar and sharp. She could feel Julia's breath pause beside her. Amara smiled, not tight, not forced, just calm. Different systems create strong solutions, she said evenly. So do different voices. There was no applause, just silence. Eleanor leaned toward the woman beside her and whispered something. The woman smiled politely. After the panel, people stood and moved toward private conversations. Richard clapped Amara lightly on the shoulder. "You handled that well," he said, like he was offering praise to a child. Amara looked at his hand, then back at his face. "I always do." They stepped into a smaller meeting room for final negotiations. The door closed. The smiles faded. Richard folded his hands. "Given the exposure today, we think it's best to adjust the terms." He slid a document across the table. Amara read it slowly. The changes were clear. More control for them, less flexibility for her company. "This limits our ability to operate independently," she said. Mark shrugged. "That's partnership." Amara looked at him. "No," she said. "That's ownership." Eleanor crossed her arms. "You should consider the opportunity. Many companies would." Amara met her gaze. "Many companies are not Linux." Richard's smile tightened. "Let's be realistic. This deal puts you in rooms you haven't been in before." The words landed hard. Amara closed the folder gently. In that moment, something shifted inside her. Not anger, clarity. She saw it clearly now. They did not see her as an equal. They saw her as a risk they could manage, a voice they could tolerate, a presence they could control. And she realized something else. She did not need them, not the money, not the approval, not the seat at their table. Amara stood. "I think we need time," she said calmly. Richard frowned. "Time for what?" "To review whether this partnership aligns with our values," Amara replied. Mark scoffed. "Values don't close deals." Amara looked at him. "They decide them." She walked out with Julia, leaving the folder on the table. In the hallway, Julia whispered, "Are we really doing this?" Amara kept walking. "Yes," she said quietly. Because in that room, surrounded by laughter and polished control, Amara Lewis had finally understood the truth. The deal mattered far less than the power she already held. That evening, Amara did not go home right away. She returned to the Linux office, even though most of the lights were off and the floor was quiet. The city outside her window glowed in long lines of white and gold. She stood there for a while, her jacket still on, replaying the meeting in her mind, not the laughter, but the assumptions. They thought she needed them. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop. One by one, she reviewed the documents her team had prepared weeks earlier. Alternative proposals, emails from overseas partners, missed calls she had postponed returning. All the doors she had left half closed out of politeness. Julia knocked lightly and stepped in. "I figured you'd be here," she said. Amara nodded. "I needed quiet." Julia sat across from her. "They're going to push," she said. "Richard already sent a message asking when we can reset the conversation." Amara let out a slow breath. "Of course he did." "Are you angry?" Julia asked carefully. Amara thought for a moment. "No," she said. "I'm clear." That night she called Sandra first. "They crossed a line," Sandra said after listening. "But legally we're clean. You can walk away at any point." "And strategically?" Amara asked. Sandra paused. "Walking away will surprise them. It will also cost them more than it costs you." Amara closed her eyes briefly. "That's what I thought." Next came Dev. "They think you're bluffing," he said. "They think this is the peak for us." Amara smiled faintly. "Then they haven't been paying attention." Over the next few days, the shift began quietly. Amara returned emails she had delayed. She scheduled calls at early hours to match other time zones. She listened. She asked questions. She did not rush. On a video call with a European logistics firm, the CEO leaned forward and said, "We've been watching Linux for a while. We like how you move." Amara replied simply, "We value partners who listen." When the call ended, she sat back and felt something unfamiliar. Relief. Meanwhile, the Hales grew restless. Richard paced his office phone pressed to his ear. "She's not responding," he said. "No, I don't know why." Yes, I agree, it's unusual. Mark rolled his eyes from the couch. She's playing games. Eleanor frowned. Or she's reconsidering. Richard stopped pacing. She wouldn't. Why not, Eleanor asked. Because this deal is good for her, Richard said sharply. Eleanor hesitated. Is it that question stayed in the room longer than anyone liked? At Lynx, Amara met with her full advisory team. They gathered around the table, documents spread out, screens glowing. We don't react, Amara said. We proceed. Sandra nodded. If they reach out again, we listen, Amara replied. But we don't explain ourselves. Dev smiled slightly. Strategic silence. Amara met his eyes. Exactly. Is real power loud or is it silent? The next message from Richard came 2 days later. Polite, curious, almost respectful. Amara read it once and set it aside. That evening she walked home instead of taking a car. The air was cool. The streets were busy but distant. For the first time in weeks, her shoulders felt lighter. She thought of her mother's voice. You will not hide. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't fighting either. She was choosing. And somewhere across the city in a penthouse full of glass and certainty, the Hale family began to feel something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. The formal request came on a Friday morning. Richard Hale's assistant emailed at 9:02 a.m., marked urgent, requesting a final meeting. Not a call, not an informal conversation, a meeting with lawyers present. Amara read the message, then forwarded it to Sandra and Dev with a single line. Let's close this. The conference room at Hale & Sons Capital looked the same as before. Polished table, framed deals, quiet confidence hanging in the air. But the mood had changed. Richard sat straighter than usual. Eleanor's smile was tighter. Mark leaned forward, elbows on the table, his tone already defensive. Amara entered with Sandra and Julia. She greeted them politely and took her seat. Richard cleared his throat. Thank you for coming. We felt it was time to finalize matters. Amara nodded. I agree. Mark smirked. Good. We've all had time to think. Richard slid a revised contract across the table. We're prepared to move forward on our terms. Amara did not touch the document. Sandra glanced at her, then back at Richard. We reviewed your revisions, and Richard asked. And we won't be accepting them, Amara said calmly. The room went still. Mark laughed. You're negotiating. No, Amara replied. I'm informing you. Eleanor leaned in. Amara, let's not be emotional. Amara met her eyes. I'm not. Richard's voice hardened. This partnership gives you credibility. Amara tilted her head slightly. Our results do that, Mark scoffed. You're overestimating your position. Amara folded her hands on the table. No, you underestimated it. She finally reached for the document, not to read it, but to slide it back. We will not proceed with this deal, she said, effective immediately. Silence. Richard stared at her. You can't be serious. Amara held his gaze. I am. Eleanor's voice rose. Do you know what you're walking away from? Yes, Amara said. A partnership without respect. Mark shook his head. This is because of a few jokes, a misunderstanding. Amara's voice stayed steady. This is because of a pattern. Richard leaned back, trying to regain control. You're making a mistake. Amara stood. No, she said. I'm making a decision. Sandra gathered her papers. Julia stood beside Amara. As they turned to leave, Richard spoke again, quieter now. You'll regret this. Amara paused at the door. She looked back once. No, she said. You will. They walked out. The elevator ride down was silent. Julia's hands shook slightly. Did we just... She started. Yes, Amara said gently. We did. When the elevator doors opened, sunlight poured in from the lobby windows. Amara stepped forward and felt her chest rise with a deep breath. Upstairs, Richard sat frozen, staring at the empty doorway. Mark broke the silence. She'll come back. But Richard wasn't sure anymore. For the first time, he wondered if they had laughed at the wrong person. The news did not spread loudly at first. It moved the way real consequences often do, quietly through private calls and careful questions. By Monday morning, 2 investors had canceled meetings with Hale & Sons Capital. No explanation, just polite delays. Richard noticed the shift immediately. "Why are they pulling back?" he asked his assistant. She hesitated. "They said they're reassessing alignment." Richard felt a tight knot form in his chest. At lunch, Mark slammed his phone down on the table. "The logistics firm from Berlin signed with Lynx," he said. "This morning." Eleanor looked up sharply. "Signed," Mark nodded. "Long term. Full integration." The room went silent. Richard pushed his plate away. The loss was not just financial, it was reputational. Word had spread that Amara Lewis had walked away, not been pushed out, not failed, but chosen to leave. And people were paying attention. At Lynx, the atmosphere was different, calmer, focused. There was no celebration, no victory speech. Amara stood in the operations room reviewing rollout timelines with Dev. "This changes our expansion pace," Dev said. "In a good way," Amara nodded. "Let's not rush it." Julia watched from the doorway. Later, she caught up with Amara near the elevators. "You okay?" Julia asked. Amara smiled softly. "Yes, just tired." That evening, Amara sat alone in her apartment, shoes off, lights low. She poured herself a glass of water and sat by the window. The city felt quieter tonight. For the first time in weeks, she let herself feel it. Not pride, not revenge, relief. She thought about the laughter, the comments, the years of translating herself for rooms that never tried to understand her. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't explained her worth. She had simply walked away. 2 weeks later, Amara was invited to speak at a regional business summit. The room was full, diverse, alert. When she took the stage, she spoke the same way she always had. Clear, calm, herself. This time, no one laughed. Afterward, a young woman approached, her eyes bright. "Thank you," she said. "I've been told I need to change how I speak to be taken seriously." Amara smiled. "You don't," she said. "You need to know when to leave the room." Across town, Eleanor Hale watched a replay of that speech on her tablet. She listened closely this time, not to the accent, but to the message. She turned the screen off and sat quietly. The world had not ended, but something had shifted, and Amara Lewis was already moving forward. The new office was brighter, not bigger, just calmer. Natural light filled the space, and the walls were still bare, waiting for time to give them meaning. Amara stood by the window phone pressed to her ear. "Yes," she said. "We can move ahead next quarter. I'll have my team coordinate." She ended the call and set the phone down. On her desk sat a simple plaque someone from the team had given her. No title, no praise. Just one word: forward. Julia stepped in. "They confirmed the partnership," she said. "All terms accepted." Amara nodded. "Good." She took her seat and opened her laptop, already moving on. She no longer needed to explain her voice. Rooms adjusted to her presence now, not because she demanded it, but because she had proven she would not stay where she was diminished. The world had not changed overnight, but her place in it had. Respect does not come from sounding like others. It comes from knowing your value when others refuse to see it. Prejudice often hides behind smiles and soft words, but dignity speaks in choices. You do not need to raise your voice to be powerful. Sometimes the strongest statement is knowing when to walk away. And when you do, the right doors open quietly but fully. If this story moved, you take a moment to like the video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about strength, dignity, and quiet victories. Your support helps these stories reach more people and reminds us all that respect is never something you have to beg for.